Okay. Well, thanks very much for all of you joining, and our special thanks to Michel Jean, who's going to present today. Probably many, just based on who I've seen kind of connect here, know Michel. He was the Director General for quite a few years in the Meteorological Service of Canada, looking after really the Canadian Meteorological Centre, which is kind of an environmental center today. I think also, and what makes this really kind of a special discussion today is that Michel became the president of the Commission for Basic Systems about 6 years ago, and WMO sort of has a great oversight of kind of the evolution of numerical weather prediction, and more recently, this focus on earth sciences and this kind of earth science prediction capacity. There's been the onset of artificial intelligence, and he's going to kind of cover all of this. About 4 years ago, there was a major restructuring of WMO, and Michel became the president of the Commission for Observations, Infrastructure, and Information, and abbreviated as INFCOM, which really encompasses all of the primary systems that WMO manage, including the various numerical, the global prediction centers, the emphasis on some of the climate science modeling, et cetera, all sort of under the auspices of the president. So, Michel, we look forward to your talk, and over to you.
So thank you very much, David, and it's a real pleasure for me to be with many colleagues I've had the pleasure to work with over the years. Over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, what I'll try to do is to provide a little bit of context on this particular discussion, provide a bit of background so that everybody knows a little bit where I'm coming from in terms of WMO perspective. We'll gradually enter into more of the recent development in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, going through a few key applications that are actually, or experimentation that are taking place right now. And then we will get into the final part of the talk, which will be about sharing, I guess, my own thinking based on my own personal experience and what I see from an international perspective on a few key elements which essentially support the meteorological enterprise. And I will end a little bit with a few thoughts about issues that we have in Canada in terms of be prepared for this massive disruption that will not only affect the meteorological enterprise, but that will affect essentially all the pillars of the society we live in. So just a quick recap as to what the World Meteorological Organization does, essentially, just for everybody to remember that WMO is the United Nations Systems authoritative voice on the state and behavior of the Earth's systems. I will use your Earth systems to avoid repeating weather, water, climate, ocean, and other and related environments. So Earth systems, that will be it. WMO also provide the international framework for international cooperation to advance Earth systems services to improve the well-being of all, essentially. As well, just a quick reminder that under the leadership of the United Nations and the WMO in the early 60s, we established the World Weather Watch, which is essentially the architecture under which we are still working today. And you see it depicted there. So it's all about observing system, data collection and data exchange in real time, and what used to be called a global data processing and forecasting system. And David, you will be glad to hear that we have adopted a new term for that, which is the WMO integrated processing and prediction system, WIPS. So it's easy to pronounce WIPS with respect to GDPFS. So we did respond to your request, David, when you were the president of the organization. That framework is important because what we do in terms of the meteorological enterprise, be it in Canada or abroad, essentially would not be possible without this architecture. It is celebrating its 70th birthday, and of course, over the course of the next couple of years, this will evolve. We will evolve in something that, for the time being, we will call the World Weather Watch 2.0 architecture. And a lot of what we will be discussing today, in a sense, will be framed as part of the evolution of that architecture. The other point I would like to make is that this architecture, in terms of global data exchange and global data processing and the provision of services in real time, is pretty much unique. There's probably two other similar architecture globally that really exists right now. So to me, in my view, this is quite an achievement from this community. David made reference to the WMO reform, which took place in 2019. I will maybe make a few comments with respect to the WMO Extraordinary Congress that took place in 2021. And the reason for it is that three things which are essentially becoming the fundamental pillars that will support the evolution of technology and based on data. So of course, AI and machine learning are part of that. Were adopted there. The first one is WMO Resolution 1 in terms of the open data exchange policy. The other one is the establishment of the Global Basic Observing Network, which is about securing the basic network that is essential for securing global numerical weather and environmental prediction. And we will talk about AI-driven model later on, but nonetheless, you will see that this is key, actually, be it for traditional numerical weather prediction or data-driven AI approaches. So the GBON, so the Global Basic Observing Network, securing that is actually essential. And last but not least is an initiative called SOF, which is about Systematic Observations Financing Facility, which is about to provide lesser developed countries, and especially those in data sparse area, with the funding necessary to secure the Global Basic Observing Network. So, and we will get back, you will see why this is important later on. A few words about where we are going. I already mentioned the WIPS, the WMO Integrated Processing and Provisions or Prediction System, which ultimately is about building a digital twin of Earth for all, with all, the component of the environment. So be it with traditional architecture for NWP or, data-driven modeling approach, nonetheless, that doesn't change the long-term vision. It's about the WMO Integrated Global Observing System. It has already been established. This is growing. And increasingly, we are relying and accessing, actually, ancillary data set, which are essential in the context of coupling all, the various components of the environment. So if you look at, if you go back 20 years ago, many of the data sets we're using today in real time were not being used back then, and that trend will continue to increase. The other thing that is important to recall here and in fact, there was a meeting 2 weeks ago with the satellite operator in Geneva, is the explosion of satellite observation, a new observing platform, especially based on micro satellite there. And of course, there has already been an explosion in the amount of data, but that explosion will continue, and it will actually continue to exponentially increase over time. And last but not least, if we want to make sense of all that, you actually need a data access and data exchange mechanism that support essentially the interoperability principles that will be necessary to deal with the big data challenges and moving toward this broad Earth systems approach. So in a sense, it is really about bringing all the countries into a certain set of interoperable principles and data discovery principles that will actually allow an acceleration of the use of data. So essentially, a lot of the focus right now is about lesser developed countries. Canada is already WIS2 compliant. Most of the developed countries are WIS2 compliant. And over the last few years, I mean, we now have 45 lesser developed countries who are now WIS2 compliant, and that number continue to increase over time. So this is all quite positive, actually. Maybe one comment on WIS 2.0. It is also when I talk about having a common set of principles, it's about fair principles, right? It's about findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of the data there. So once you have that, then essentially nothing stops you to have an almost infinite spectrum of applications using those data sets. So the challenges and the opportunities that we are facing right now, I will focus on one element, which is linked to an initiative announced by the Secretary General of the United Nations in March 2022, which is about early warning for all. And the reason for it is that we all see how the climate is evolving. I mean, climate mitigation is still on top of the agenda, but the reality is that this will take decades, if not century, to really have climate mitigation action having an impact on the climate system. In the meantime, extreme weather, climate, and other related event will continue to become more extreme, and the frequency will continue to increase, and therefore climate adaptation is key. And early warning for all is really about all countries to have the information they need. And of course, the internal mechanism within their own national government machinery for those warnings to go out and save lives, essentially. That will become, it is critical, but it will become even more critical as we move on. And in this context, I will not go through all this, but in the context of early warning for all, you can see that what we already do is fundamental into filling that gap, right? So you still have at least 50 or 60% of the countries. So if you look at 192 WMO country members, there's approximately half of them which do not have a national early warning system for a number of reasons, but part of it is that they don't have access to observation, they don't have access to NWP, they don't have access to ancillary data. And they don't even have access to the communication infrastructure to access and disseminate that information. So the basic infrastructure is fundamental. In that context, the role of the big companies is essentially essential. Our community has been historically extremely shy in dealing with the private companies. Well, the reality is that national governments or even regional consortia of countries will not be able to tackle this. And when you look at the way the basic IT infrastructure is evolving, I mean, it is all big tech driven, and so we are working hard to establish the proper arrangement with them so that we work collectively there. I will not insist on the national institutional mechanism, but because essentially this is really under the Early Warning for All, the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Organization is dealing with that part. But ultimately is about having data sharing and coordination activities that maximize every dollar that the global community is investing on existing or planned infrastructure. And artificial intelligence will play, it's already playing a role, but it will play an even critical role in this. Of course, the challenge is the following: are governments and their institutions up to the challenge? And we will see later on that I'm always optimistic, but there's a lot of things that needs to be done for this to become a reality. So the data challenge and artificial intelligence. This is just the monitoring and forecast information cycle that we have. I mean, you could apply this to any developed meteorological services around the world. The numbers you see are the Canadian numbers. This will vary depending on what you are looking for. But the bottom line is that there is a lot of data. And in particular, I would like to draw your attention to the close to a billion geospatial web service requests that are received by the Met Service of Canada on a monthly basis. So this is a lot of information, an awful lot of information. So essentially, we're dealing with the big data process. And throughout the value cycle, from observation to simulation to analysis to the generation of product and services, artificial intelligence / machine learning is already playing a role, but will play a role as the technology become available and as the cost of technology actually gets cheaper over time. And I will not go through the detail of all that, but there is a role everywhere, and I will deal a little bit with a few aspects linked to disaster risk reduction in the following few slides there. So in the context of AI, it's really about defining a scope, and I'll put a bit of a World Meteorological Organization hat in order to look a little bit at the scope there. So we're essentially coordinating a global program of surface-based and satellite observations. If I look at it from a monitoring perspective. And of course, AI offers the potential to combine data of different resolutions, level of quality, completeness, different reference system, and different format. This is already taking place, actually. It offers the potential as well to play a role in the entire value chain, from combining observation, post-processing activities, bias correction, true intelligence, data analytics, leading to essentially better operational forecasting and applications. A lot of what our bench forecaster would do in terms of identifying the triggers for high impact weather can and are automated for the most part in many Met services. If you think about the NINIO forecaster workstation developed by Germany, and Canada is a partner in that. There are already AI-driven and machine learning-driven nowcasting application being developed by that. So essentially, identifying specific radar signature as a precursor of high-impact weather. So this is already in place, and this trend will continue to accelerate over time. AI can lead to dissemination optimization with data, and I will get to that later on in the presentation. And of course, AI in combination with other tools and other communities can enhance situational awareness of natural hazards, and increasingly, providing weather warning as one example, you do need to rely on other information. If you think about flash flood as one example, I mean, you do need many landscape-related data sets in order for, the coupling of the meteorological information, the climate information, and, the landscape information. It is that combination that is necessary, and AI actually can help quite significantly. So the last point I would make here is it is really not about the machine replacing the human. It's really about the human leveraging the capability that the machine has to offer. And we may get to that at the end of the presentation. So gradually, I will not go into the detail of that slide, but starting with a global scope in terms of where AI can play a role, then if you look specifically at disaster risk reduction under the Early Warning for All initiative, then you can see how AI can play a role and ultimately providing advanced disaster management that will leave no one behind. And it does offer as well the possibility for regional centers to actually provide services on behalf of national authorities when national authorities are either overwhelmed or have a capability that is completely destroyed. Think about what happened in Haiti with the earthquake. There was essentially no infrastructure left, and other countries had to essentially cover for the Haiti Met service there. So AI and machine learning and all of those related technology could actually make this process a lot easier than it has been up to now. And last but not least, a lot of the adaptation, short-term adaptation strategies are about early detection and situational awareness. And there's so much technologies, there's so much data coming on that AI is probably the only way to provide what I call the trigger to our operational meteorologists, to take action. Think about leveraging the billions of pictures that are published on the social media daily. There are already AI applications that are, going through all that in real time and essentially extracting the information that could be made available to emergency measure organization. Of course, there are limitations. I mean, the portrait, the landscape is not all that rosy. Data-driven approach, by definition, are driven by data, right? And of course, the quality of what you get is linked to the quality of the data you are using. It doesn't mean that you cannot use, if you look at data as a tiered system, it doesn't mean that, let's say, lesser quality data are not useful, but they are only useful if you have a basic set of high quality data that you can rely on. A few examples now. I'll just accelerate because I want to give the time for some interaction. So there's a lot going on in Canada and around the world, and what I'll be showing is really a very small subset. A lot of work is actually done in ECCC. So there's a lot of experimentation taking place in Dorval and elsewhere. And a lot of it is really what I call trying to capitalize on the low-hanging fruit, right? There are things that are easily amenable to machine learning and AI application. Think about atmospheric river analysis and prediction. That's really an obvious one. you will see reference to PAIRS, IBM PAIRS. PAIRS is a geospatial data AI enabling platform, and which essentially is connected to the Watson engine back in the US. And when you think about it, let's say from a Canadian perspective, we have an IBM HPC environment. Experimentations are now taking place, leveraging the IBM PAIRS platform. And that immediately opened the possibility to link that with the Watson engine. So you can see that the ecosystem is quite interesting in Canada to do some of those experimentation. On the international scene, this is a WWRP, World Weather Research Program project, which is about satellite-based nowcasting for Africa, which is essentially leveraging Meteosat second generation and Meteosat third generation that are providing a huge amount of information, but in particular, a lot of really relevant information with the lightning imager on MTG, on the Meteosat third generation platform there, which is essentially extremely useful to provide early warning and proper adaptation services in Africa through the use of satellite information there. WCRP, the World Climate Research Program, again, is an interesting example, in particular in the context of CMIP, the Coupled Model Intercomparison Project. So we all know what it is. I would like to insist on the fact that CMIP generate essentially close to 7 million data sets for a total of 25 petabytes of information, and it serves 16,000 users globally. With this kind of the number of data set, with the amount of information that is available, honestly, there's no other way to really make sense of that information. So you really need to have smart data analytics approach and increasingly AI-driven approach to actually make your way into even extracting the data that you need require a bit of an interface, which could be, and in some cases is actually AI-driven there. So a few final thoughts, and to me, this is where I will start to be a little provocative. You probably, I'm not sure if Gilbert showed a similar slide a few weeks ago, but essentially, we have seen an explosion of data-driven modeling approaches. I'll go on the numerical weather prediction side of things over the past few years. And just to give you an example, we did a literature search in 2023. There has been over 200 peer-reviewed publication that I am aware of, and that list is by far not exhaustive on data-driven modeling approach. So you can see there. So that slide has been provided to me by my colleague Andy Brown at the European Center. And it should drive a lot of humility, because we all knew that those approaches were being developed. We all knew that the private sector, private companies were actively developing those approaches. We all knew that the fact that in the meteorological enterprise, we have the luxury of having well-organized and easily searchable database, which, if you want to design, machine learning and AI applications, I mean, the world of medicine, the world of meteorology have this in common, is that they all are supported by extremely well-managed database, which automatically facilitate this kind of work. So all that to say that now there's a load of those data-driven modeling approach, and I will not go into the detail of that, but Canada is, I would say we are late in terms of developing approaches, but this is a challenge and this is an opportunity. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. But Dorval right now is running two data-driven model for two reasons. One, for meteorologists to get acquainted with what it is not, and how it compares with traditional numerical weather prediction systems. And the other one is really to have a well-organized validation and verification system to really understand the strengths and weaknesses of those approaches. So a few final thoughts on data. Well, I guess I've been mentioning the word data and observation many times because it's important. We now have a framework through WMO Resolution 1 that enable that. There's an exponential growth of those systems, and I will not go through this, but I'm not sure if you see my pointer here, but last year, 1.8 trillion pictures have been taken globally and shared on social media. So just imagine the richness of this in terms of identifying high impact weather or environmental condition. On top of, the radar systems that we have, the space-based platform and so forth, so on. But with these kinds of numbers, essentially, AI is probably the only way to flag what, where, and when to look for in the context of nowcasting or short-range forecast. In terms of the data, there's an increasing role of the private sector. That could be seen as a challenge, but in my view, this is a real opportunity that we need to leverage. And we are working quite closely with them so that we come up with open source approaches and a gradual interoperability of data loggers, if I can use that one example. And of course, the data availability is key. And there is no other way than to leverage the big tech compute and storage capabilities as global and regional data cache with cloud-based algorithm to reconstruct the data. So the days of, centers pushing the data is over, because this is simply a mathematically and physically impossible problem to resolve. And it will be essentially access and compute where the data is, which essentially rely on smart algorithm to do that. For processing and prediction, I mean, you've seen the emergence of a data-driven approach, so we will need to cope with that. And the private sector capabilities will need to be factored in. Google is operating a global flash flood forecasting system right now. They're running a global hydrological modeling system right now. They're sharing the information. The information is available. Our National Hydrological Service in Canada are essentially experimenting with this. So the reality is that it's not only a government-based architecture that we will need to rely on, but there will be a room with increasing importance from the private sector. Exponential growth of data. There's a big quest in terms of exascale systems. If we push the envelope even further, so is there a role for quantum computing? I guess the short answer is the proof remains to be done in the context of the kind of mathematical problem that we need to deal with. If you look at the angle from a traditional physically based numerical weather prediction system, if you look at it from a data-driven modeling approaches, then quantum become a very interesting solution in the long range. This being said, we're not talking about operational high availability system within the next decade or 15 years. And as I have said, AI ML application might actually be the first step to leverage that. I will not talk about the emergence of quantum sensors, but this is something that you really need to look for. In particular, so quantum sensors for gravimetric measurements will be on board a few upcoming satellites in the early 2030s, I believe. And this will likely change. It will be, again, another disruption or, a fantastic breakthrough in terms of the precision of measurements. And gravimetric measurements are important because this is key to measure, to have a good understanding of the underground water there. I'll skip this. So the rise of machine learning, well, you can see there are essentially three scenarios. And so I'll get back to a comment I've made earlier. So Canada has been a bit late. We're picking up right now. But being late, I mean, there's a challenge, but there's an opportunity associated with it. So we're actually in a good position to probably reflect a little bit as to how the evolution of our modeling system needs to go. Are you essentially keeping AI only for post-processing and calibration of traditional models? Do you want to move into a hybrid modeling approach where you essentially run those two type of models, one data-driven, one physically based? And of course, the third one is to really go completely into a data-driven approach. And of course, with each of those scenarios, you can actually derive a high-performance computing strategy associated with both. And my personal opinion is that probably with what we know right now, the hybrid is probably the best approach for the time being, because I'm honestly not convinced that a fully data-driven approach will actually do the job. And there's a number of theoretical reasons for that, but there's also a number of practical reasons for it. So given the fact that Met services around the world are essentially dealing with, government-wide mission critical, I would have a tendency to be a little more conservative. Going to a complete model replacement at this stage with what we know and the unknowns that we still don't know would probably be a bit of an irresponsible move to make. So I will skip that for the sake of times, but it does open a number of thoughts with respect to the evolution of technical regulations. I'll insist on coding practices which need to be open and transparent. And so far, the experience we have with, the data-driven model approach from all the private companies and private initiatives. I mean, so the code is essentially open source and transparent and relatively easy to implement. There are ethical considerations of using AI and machine learning, in particular in the context of the reproducibility of results. And so the black box syndrome is still there, right? So why would a data-driven model give you a certain result? There's no way to actually figure out which physical process or dynamic process in the atmosphere, the ocean, or in the cryosphere is actually responsible for the model going in a direction with respect to another direction. With a data-driven model, this is not really possible as currently. I'm not saying it will never happen, but we should be thinking about that. The whole methodology for data-driven approach also need to be extremely well documented. And again, it goes back to the reproducibility of results. As well, the world we're in, I mean, some would say that it's already the Far West. I would say that it is still relatively under control, but it could become extremely complex. And if you think about the national security consideration of some of the product we're relying, right? So think about the role of meteorology in supporting the management of the energy grid at the national level. Well, it's not, we could think about ways that fake data could be dropped in those decision-making systems, which open a full door about, so should some of the data being encrypted in a certain way. So the world is really changing. There's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of very significant challenges around this. And maybe, the final state of affair would be that to have fully interoperable data and, processing mechanisms within a nationally safe environment. And this is much easier said than done, actually. And of course, we will need to think globally in terms of probably federative approach. And again, we will need to reflect on how we will manage that, because the information we generate nationally is key to national sovereignty consideration and national security consideration as well. So if you think about a federation of a few, centers doing an awful lot of things on behalf of many countries, a country like Canada will really need to reflect as to how they want to position themselves there. So in the old world, and David knows the story there, we worked really, really hard to position Canada to become a World Meteorological Center. In terms of resourcing, will we be able to maintain this kind of status in the long run? That remains to be done. But in my view, there is an argument to be made in terms of that maintaining the global capability in the context of national security and national sovereignty consideration. And while we discuss all this, let's keep in mind that there are still over 100 countries that don't even have access to what is already available. Before I get to the acknowledgement, there's a few comments I would really like to make for Canada. And to me, I guess this is really, really important. In my personal opinion, one of the reasons why Canada is late in many, and it's true in meteorology in terms of those emerging applications, but it's true elsewhere as well, is that there is an issue right now with the existing governance in the public service of Canada with respect to science and technology and information technology. The way the governance is done is way too complicated, way too fragmented, and the transaction cost is essentially huge, absolutely huge, to even resolve relatively simple model, relatively simple problem. And if you look at those organizations like ECMWF, UK Met Office, and I can think about a few other fully developed national meteorological and hydrological services around the world. The reason why they're ahead of us is essentially because they have a full integration of science and technology and information technology and all the other supporting functions as part of the organization, which means that they don't have the transaction cost, they are extremely nimble, and they're not subjected to some other policy-related priorities, which would divert essentially IT or S&T resources for a priority that is not linked to the priority of the organization there. So essentially, and I'm not inventing this, I mean, there has been a few papers in Canadian policy-related journal essentially saying that, the existing governance within the government of Canada in science and technology and IT is leading the country to a Phoenix-like issue. And the signs are already there. The digital transformation is lagging. Bureaucratic processes that are in place cannot follow essentially the current pace of S&T and IT development. So essentially, you see everywhere signs of paralysis by analysis. There's no real alignment of strategies between private academia and government, and it's currently true between the feds and the provinces. But it will likely get worse when we get in at the city levels, because city levels are expected to play a very fundamental role in climate adaptation strategy in the future. If you look at the ranking of Canada globally in terms of innovation, those numbers are going down year after year. And in one of the OECD, I believe we were 27th as of last year. So essentially, but those problems are known. They're well documented. If you read, policy-related papers, I mean, this is discussed. You look at the ArriveCan things. The issue is fundamentally not about the lack of bureaucratic processes. I mean, there's enough check and balance in the system. The issue is a lot more fundamental. It is linked at the way things have been fragmented over the past 20 years, and the key for success is the integration of all that. So the problems are known, the solutions are known. We have the brains in this country to get the train back on track. It's really a matter in the senior ranks to acknowledge that we have a problem in this country, but we have everything else to be able to resolve that. So with this, David, I'm giving you the floor. As usual, I talk too much, but I'm a little bit passionate about those topics, as you're well aware, and I will stop there and back to you, David. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Michel. That was a great presentation. Your last set of comments kind of raise a whole different, I might think, a whole different focus. In particular, could be a talk on itself about the complexities of kind of a, let's say, government-driven processes that would result in how we might embrace AI in the future. But, there were several questions that were posed during the talk. A couple of them related to this question of, let's say, some of the challenges, not necessarily, but say some of the limitations of AI. Many are quite aware that AI is focused on this kind of it's kind of a learned process in kind of based on a set of data. And there's a couple of questions that have been posed, one relating to there's this idea that AI be immune from this kind of human bias of not predicting something that humans have never observed before. You might frame that into, will AI actually get those extreme events and predict them well? I think you've kind of suggested a process with this hybrid modeling, but there are other questions related to that were raised, have you kind of answered with respect to this kind of challenges of how you see AI being embraced, in either or is it an and question? So I thought if you could just highlight maybe a few questions. One last one, which related to the limitation of data. And in an Earth system, we have a lot of limitations of data. Like we have limitations just based on our weather observations around the globe, etc. But maybe you could speak a little bit to these questions that have come up related to limitations of AI and kind of how you see sort of the path to sort of overcome them.
Yeah, I'll try to go sequentially because in a sense the three are links to a certain degree. So in terms of the ability to actually predict extreme, let's say that have never been observed. So the machine has never been trained with the kind of extreme. This is actually quite intriguing, and there is a lot of research going on right now. And I guess the easy answer to say is that that's the reason why we're running those models, is to actually try to see what are the deficiencies associated with that. This being said, there has been a few papers recently with very intriguing results, and one is about I don't remember the hurricane or the typhoon, but I mean something of extremely high intensity that happened very, very, very seldom in the course of history. I think it was one of the cyclone in the Pacific. And the data-driven model actually did a really, really good job at it, probably better than the actual physically based system. And it's early days because we don't know if it's only a fluke, it's, let's say, a statistical fluke, or if somehow, even though the training data set, let's say, is based on reanalysis at 25-kilometer resolution, so the richness of all of the data has been filtered to 25 kilometers, but somehow the machine maybe got a signal that a traditional modeling system did not actually. But it's early days, so we honestly don't know. And there's a lot of debate from that perspective. This being said, if you look at the fact that those data-driven approach are essentially trained by reanalysis, well, one could think that one day it will not rely solely on a reanalysis, but also will take into consideration the full richness of each of the observation. So if you think about an observation at a certain point on the Earth's surface, you could say that what you measure in terms of physical variables is sort of the integration of all the energy spectrum that are actually affecting that point. And maybe this could actually lead to detecting something that may trigger an event that has never been observed in the past. So it's early days, but this is the reason why I would think that moving from what we have in terms of modeling system to a full data-driven modeling approach, in my view, would probably be irresponsible at this stage, because we just simply don't know if those systems will be up to catch those extreme weather event. And we may end up with the way climate is evolving right now with situations that have never been observed in the past, right? So I think we need to be really prudent about this. In terms of it will be only so good as the data that are available. And I'll take a slightly different slant as to what you have mentioned, David. Although we have open data policy in place, there's still a lot of data that are not openly and shared. If you think about hydrological data as one example, well, because of the sensitivity about water management in large part of the world, I mean, this is a very difficult area. I can tell you, it's tough to actually implement resolution 1 for hydrology as one example. So it will be only so good as the data that we have. If you look at Canada as a country, if you look at a lot of the landscape-related data sets that are owned by provincial authorities, I mean, the openness varies as a function of where you are in this country. So if you look at it in terms of building systems, it becomes extremely complicated as well. So it's a complicated landscape. Okay. So those, in a sense, would be my early thoughts on the 3 points you have mentioned.
Okay. So there's a couple of there's quite a few, but let me you mentioned digital twin. this idea of digital twin. And this question really came in early on, this digital twin technologies. And how do you know when to trust what the twin does in such a complex field as a climate system and its influences on the physical and living planet? So, I mean, it's interesting because you highlighted towards the end of your talk, your sort of your provocative questions about fake data and its particular influence. So there's kind of relationship between what you said about fake data and this question.
Yeah, so digital twins, we're really far from digital twins, right? I mean, people have a tendency to think that like if I look at the current, the best operational modeling systems around the world, so they're fully coupled between the atmosphere, the ocean, the cryosphere, to a certain degree with hydrology. But I mean, to have coupled system and full digital twin, I mean, there's a huge delta de Dirac, as we say in physics, between the two. The only short answer to that is so digital twins will allow us to improve whatever we do in the short term, medium term, sub-seasonal scale, seasonal scale, probably. If you look at digital twins in the context of climate, then essentially this is a bit of a different game there, and the only way we will be able to figure out whether they do a good or a bad job is essentially relying on what we know about the current climate. But there will always remain the unknown about how they will react to a changing climate. And this is where I think the approach to have digital twins based on what I call the fundamental laws of physics is probably the only way to go. Because if you look at it in the use of data-driven approach from a climate modeling perspective, there is still a lot of work to be done. But this being said, I'll just use what I know from IBM, because I have a closer relationship with them, is that they're actively, they have a lot of research initiative around the world under the IBM research umbrella, if I can use that word, essentially trying to push the envelope for data-driven in the climate space.
Yeah, the one.
So more unknowns than certainty in that area.
Yeah. So it's kind of a related question, because you highlighted the important role the private sector plays, particularly in bringing kind of the big data infrastructure together, and even if to ensure access given the volume of data. And there was kind of a second question that came up about digital twins, about the importance of it to be connected to authoritative data. And there was an earlier question that talked about issues of quality control within countries, and certainly national governments, and within WMO we put a lot of emphasis on ensuring a high quality of data and a high standard of data. You mentioned in your talk about how AI might be helpful for bringing different sources of data together into this context. But how do you see us kind of approaching this, I guess, going forward, to ensure that we have good data and not bad data? Or if AI is driven more from the private sector in sense of development, how do we ensure that the quality that is necessary is kind of embedded in these processes? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, essentially, I think the only solution is like if you look at what WMO is doing, it's all about having in place those rules and standards and you know, well documented and well reviewed methodologies to actually ensure exactly that. It's about maintaining. I'm looking at measurements as one example and instrumentation. So the work that is done under the auspices of the WMO, in my view, is increasingly important, exactly for the reason that you've just laid out, and the simple reality is that. I mean, you cannot make sense of bad data if you don't have high quality data. I mean, as a junior meteorologist, and many of you will remember those stories, but we all remember those days. Fake data is not something new, right? I mean, if you recall when we were doing, you know, a surface analysis, hand surface analysis, you could see those ships, those Russian ships of the east coast of North America, and they always had one parameter that was wrong, for the reason that they didn't want to be located exactly. And sometimes the wind was off, sometimes the pressure was off, sometimes the temperature was, there was always something wrong with one of those reports. So fake data are nothing new, but the only way we could make sense of those fake points, because the others were, you know, were high quality. So I think there's no other way, and I think this is really, we need to maintain this global coherence through WMO. I would add a few others like the International Telecommunication Union as another one, which plays a really big role actually in terms of driving the AI agenda globally as well. So I think to me this is probably the only answer, and the signal we have so far from the private sector is encouraging in the sense that this is what they're looking for as well, because they well know that the output of those data-driven approach is only as good as the quality of the data that goes in.
So I'm going to give you one last question, which it's been hinted at here. There's quite a richness of comments that have come forward. I'll say that many appreciated your candidness, particularly your last sets of comments. But you spoke from the heart about the importance, the passion, about the importance of how Canada's going to keep up, and if they don't kind of work in a more integrated way, we're not going to be keeping up. And there were several questions related about, like, how do we better position Canada? So you've kind of answered that question. But there's a relationship between the outputs that we get from these systems, AI and others, and the, let's say, the human face in this process. And I thought you didn't really speak so much about the importance of the, let's say, the human role as you see this going forward. But I think it would be, I'd be interested in, and there's a couple of questions that touch on this, about what is, how do you see the relationship between the scientist or the, you know, the meteorologist or whoever needs to be, or social scientists that are going to work with these kind of machine learning AI, and if you believe what you read about, you know, eventually they'll be doing all of their own things. So maybe you can speak a little bit about that aspect, and then I'm going to turn it over to Len to conclude.
Of course, this is the $1 million questions, and you know, it's all about looking at the glass half empty or half full, right? So I've always been extremely optimistic about the role of the human there, because I will repeat what I have said earlier. It's not about the machine replacing the man. Of course, it could be easy from a policy perspective or from a budget management perspective to say, well, I mean, we've got the silver bullet, right? We could reduce the workforce in the medical sector. Actually, if you look at it from the radiologist, I mean, 95% of X-rays and other monitoring device to monitor your bodies, I mean 95% are essentially AI analyzed, right? But would you rely on this? The answer is no, because the complicated cases the machine cannot pick, and this is why you need the expert there. So the expertise of the human is about higher value proposition, if I can use that. And in meteorology, in my view, it is exactly the same thing. It is leveraging the machine to do tasks that can be fully automated in a safe way. So, to provide triggers of high impact weather, high impact weather signatures and things like that. The machine can do that faster, better than any human being. But what it cannot do actually is what will be the implication of that. And of course, the human can actually go back to, I mean, the machine has detected the signature here, but honestly, I don't believe it's true actually. And the machine cannot do that. The machine cannot argue with itself. The human can actually. So in my view, it is really about crafting roles which really provide higher value based on the technology that we are leveraging there. Is this an easy thing to do? So you're well aware that this is something we've tried to push for the last 20, 30 years, not only in Canada, but abroad. I mean, this is a really difficult question. And right now I was hearing, research scientists commenting about data-driven model at the European Center. So, well, we're out of job. And my view is that it's not the case, actually. In my view, their job will be even more important in the future with the emergence of those technologies there. So I think it's all about, gauging the thing, but I think we need to really have an open and honest discussion about that. And it is taking place elsewhere. Hopefully it is taking place in Canada as well. And it's not only true in our business, it's true in most of S&T and IT-driven organizations. So.
I think that's, thanks again, Michel. Clearly, there's a need for how to build the experience. The so-called expert gains that expertise by, being able to diagnose and have an active role in those relationships. So hopefully, as this evolves within the meteorological community, or even in the hydrological community, there's a reflection on the important engagement and relationship building between the role that the human plays and how we use the machine. So with that, I got to say thanks very much. I'm going to pass this over to Len, who's going to make some thank yous and close off this session.
If I may, I'll just make one final comment. When I say that Canada is late in certain area, in my view, this is not a negative comment. It is just stating a fact that is relatively well documented. But this country has always been in a position to seize the opportunity and move even, faster, accelerate faster than many others. So I think we are up to that challenge. But honestly, you really need to have what I call, the proper governance in place to actually do that. But if we do that, I mean, let's see that as an opportunity. And this country, we've resolved other challenges before, and I'm sure we will be up to that challenge as well. No doubt in my mind. So see that as a really positive and optimistic comment. Okay, I stop now.
Well, it's my pleasure to thank you for this presentation, Michel. I will point out we have had an audience of about 50 people, and there will be a future broader audience viewing the recorded YouTube presentation. the excellence and thoughtfulness of the presentation was just remarkable. Thank you. And
thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to
thanks for
contribute.
everybody participating. Before you go, I would like to point out 2 follow-up seminars that are coming up, monthly seminars organized by CMOS Ottawa Center. Thursday, the 21st of March, spring, this year, Jan Boulanger will be talking on what the future holds for wildfires in a future climate, which is very much a hot topic, considering this summer we had last year and what the burning fires underground are promising for this year. Thursday, 18th of April, 2024, Joanna Dean from Carleton University here in Ottawa will be talking on teaching climate as a historian. So those 2 dates, 21st of March and 18th of April. So thank you once again, everybody, and Michel for participating in this.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Bye-bye. Au revoir.